Coming up in our next installment of America's Hope, a nation divided cannot stand. So what is America doing about politics? Can we stand united? And division in Ukraine, destroying the Ukraine Orthodox Church. Why? We'll talk about that and more in our next installment of America's Hope. Good evening, I'm Kelly Wright, and thank you for joining us this hour on America's Hope. We're glad you could join us, and we do hope that you're safe and well no matter where you are, and that you're taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. I tell you that all the time because it's true, you do matter, especially to those of us here at America's Hope. Well, tonight we're going to talk about politics. How about the fact that politics can unite us instead of dividing us? We'll be talking to the author of a new book called Politics for People Who Hate Politics. That's coming up. Also, speaking of division, many people are unaware of the fact that there's division within Ukraine. We're talking about a religious divide going on in Ukraine. People are attacking the faithful of Orthodox churches in Ukraine, and it's causing a lot of problems from within. You'll hear about that tonight, right here on America's Hope. So let's get started. The person I'm going to introduce you to has written this book, and it's an amazing book. The title alone captures me right in my heart. Politics for People Who Hate Politics. I hate politics, and I've been a political reporter for many, many years. Still, I hate it. And the author of this book is Denise Grace Gitsham, and she joins us now. Denise, welcome to the program. Talk to me about your book. I love it. Politics. I just hate politics. Politics for People Who Hate Politics. Talk to me.
So you and I are in the same boat, Kelly. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. I'm so honored, and seeing you hold up that book, it just makes my heart feel so good. I feel like everyone has sort of a love-hate relationship with politics, depending on who's in, if your party's in, if your party's out. We all have strong emotions regardless of where we fall on the love-hate spectrum for politics. I've been in politics for most of my life. I started when I was 22 on the Bush campaign with Karl Rove and got to do an incredible 6 years with Governor and then President George W. Bush, and then got to work in the Senate a little bit. And I ran for Congress in 2016 in San Diego. And so I feel like I've seen a lot of the different aspects of political world. And there are moments when I just want to say, peace out, I'm gone.
That would be me, but you mentioned some good
Yes.
people there. First of all, I've had the pleasure of working with Karl Rove back in the day when I was at Fox News. Really enjoyed working with the architect, as President
Wonderful.
George W. Called him on his reelection. And then I've had the pleasure of interviewing the former First Lady of the United States when she was serving with George W. Bush, President George W. Bush, and that was, of course, First Lady Laura Bush. Still have so much admiration for her. But look, in your book, you talk about politics that unite rather than divide, and you say right on the cover, politics can be infuriating. Let's start right there, because there are a lot of people scratching their heads saying, I don't know about this upcoming election.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all feel that way at different times. And I think, I love this spin on this quote. I actually put it in my book. You may not love politics, but politics is coming after you. It doesn't really matter whether or not you are engaged. Politics is going to affect your life. And as a Christian, I think it's so important that we're good stewards of the God-given privilege to be part of a country that allows us to have a say in how our country is governed. I am a daughter of immigrants. My father is from Canada. My mother is from China originally, and my grandfather was a two-star general with Chiang Kai-shek. And so
Wow.
they ended up leaving communist China in 1949, fleeing what was becoming communist China when they lost to Mao. And so she moved to Taiwan in the 40s and then moved to America. And she has so many stories about how grateful she is just to really be able to be part of this democratic process that gives her a voice equal to anyone who was born here, or whose parents or grandparents or great-grandparents came off the Mayflower. That's really a remarkable thing, and I think I have a special appreciation for that. being the daughter of immigrants and also the daughter of many of my dad served 20 years in the Air Force, but just a long line of folks who really love and serve their country.
Let's unpack that a little bit more. First of all, what an incredible story, especially as it relates to your mom and dad and how the two of them
Yeah.
got together and faced what would appear to be insurmountable odds and fleeing a country that had turned to communism and then, as a result of that, started persecuting its own people because of their beliefs, whether they were practicing
Horrifically.
Christianity or following Dafa or Uyghur Muslims. To that
Right.
end, what does that say about America, the fact that so many people are still coming to these shores of America?
Obviously, we're the only country that offers real hope because of our foundation on Judeo Christian principles that tell us that every person has value. We are innately valued because of who our creator is and how he gave his breath of life into us. And I think that that's something that we take for granted. Those of us who were just born here, we just presume that everyone feels that way in the world. But when I was a missionary in China in college, I was actually detained by the police.
Hmm.
And it was because I was talking about my faith and sharing it with other students, which of course I knew was illegal, but I felt like the risk was worth the reward. And so it really wasn't, though, until I was, in a dark room being interrogated about things that I was so used to speaking about freely in America that I really realized, gosh, what my mom was telling me is true. And I'm so grateful for that experience because I want those freedoms in America to prevail for generations to come, but they will only remain if, as Ronald Reagan said, we fight for it in every generation.
Denise, freedom ain't free, and we have to be
That's
willing
right.
to protect it and protect the guardrails of our constitutional
Mm-hmm.
republic as well as our democracy. And so
Mm-hmm.
you've been right there experiencing it on the front lines as a missionary. When you see what's happening throughout America today, where people are protesting, and they have a right to protest, but when you see
Mm-hmm.
them siding with a brutal regime known as Hamas or other brutal situations, does it cause you some concern when you see that taking place in America?
It causes me great concern because those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. When we don't, I lived through 9/11 in the White House. The only mission of our administration, really, from that point on, was to protect America at all costs from any external threat. And so I'm very concerned about the fact that this new generation has really become lukewarm and soft on issues of terrorism, that they don't seem to understand if it may be over in another country where you can't see it, or maybe you don't know anyone in Israel. But those threats are coming after us. When they chant death to America, they really mean it. It's not just Israel, it's also America. And I also wonder if a lot of the people who are on the side of really terrorism, that's the only way to put it, because it's true, recognize that the folks that they're standing up for are the ones that would be the first to persecute them. And so, it's a funny because that you asked this, because I'm actually a political commentator on another news station called News Nation.
Hmm.
And when I go on, I talk about these principles and how I live out the principles in my book. I always ask the Lord to help me bring hope and life and to find the gold in people, especially people I disagree with. It's easy to love the people that you agree with, but it's much harder when you've got sort of a hostile or sort of a maybe not hostile, but you see someone as your political enemy, if you will. They're on the other side of the aisle. And I thought about this issue as we were talking about Israel and Hamas, which we do all the time in the news. And I said, Lord, I really need you to help me speak about this with the same love and compassion that you told us to love our enemies. And every time I go back to my book and the principles God put in there, I say, Lord, is there something that I'm missing in this equation? Am I confusing my hatred of the terrorism that's being inflicted with a hatred of the people that you love? And that's something I keep asking the Lord to help shape my heart in, because if we're going to change minds and hearts, and honestly, we can't, the Holy Spirit can, but as humans, we can be as clever as we want. We have to pray that God can help shape and change minds. But our job is to speak the truth in love so that we can actually be effective messengers of the truth.
And Denise, that's really the epitome of what Christ meant when he said, "Oh, by the way, love and pray for your enemies." Uh,
Yes.
He didn't
It's so much
necessarily.
easier when you don't have to actually do it, right?
Yeah.
I can look at a lot of other people and what I wish they would do, but I'm so busy keeping my eyes focused on my own paper and being responsible for what God has given me to be a good steward of, which is to shepherd his love and my witness for him as well as I can.
You got me smiling, my friend, because that's exactly where my heart is too. I look at my past and think about all the people I've pointed fingers at, when the person I should
Yeah.
have been pointing the finger at is the person I look at in the mirror every day and realize that
Yeah.
God has brought me a mighty long way. I'm talking to Denise Grace Gitsham. She has written a book called Politics for People Who Hate Politics. I love the title. We're going to take a
Me
break,
too.
and we'll come back and continue our conversation. Denise, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back, everyone, on America's Hope. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm talking to Denise Grace Gitsham, and you're talking about the very thing that we have to discuss. We need to have politics in America that unite us rather than divide us, and that's what this book does. What do you think about the landscape of the political candidates that we have on the Republican side, actually trying to get that seat at the table to run against the current president of the United States, Joe Biden?
Well, as a political analyst, somebody who's seen the behind the scenes machinations of just like all the decision making, all the tactical, strategic efforts that are required, and the genius that's required to pull off a presidential campaign for the leader of the free world, you know, I could give you an analysis of that. But if I were, I think that it's pretty clear that Trump's coming out ahead and he's going to stay ahead, at least for the foreseeable future. And barring any sort of strange things that happen with our economy that put it back on track after it's been so horrifically off track, I anticipate that President Trump will once again be president. I think Nikki Haley brings a lot to the table. I think as a woman who's strong and is pro-life, but also speaks very compassionately about the issue of abortion, which is a really interesting dynamic. When I watch her, I find that many of my Christian girlfriends who share my commitment to the pro-life cause feel like there's something about the way she speaks to it that indicates that she understands how women feel in a way that a lot of other people don't. And so I think there's an opening, and just from a purely political perspective, there's sort of a niche that she's carving out for herself and really elevating the conversation in a way about really hot button topics like abortion that will perhaps open an opportunity for those of us who don't share those convictions to come together and say, what can we do to help people flourish, including the unborn? Is there some sort of way that we can move forward together and find a better path so we're not just us versus them all the time and entrenched in really intractable positions?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clearly. And of course, there are other people on that campaign trail. Of course, former governor of New Jersey,
Oh,
Chris
there are?
Christie. And let's not forget Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm just to put the names out there. I've spoken to Governor Asa Hutchinson. Really enjoy him. He's very faith-based oriented kind of
Yes.
man. But again, the elephant in the room would be the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. Do you think any Republican candidate has any potential of gaining on him, since he leads by such a vast margin?
I'm not sure. I mean, in the natural, it doesn't seem like anything can overcome him. God can do anything at any moment, depending on where his favor falls on a candidate and a nation. I'm less concerned about, in a in a way, I think stepping back outside of the Beltway gives me a perspective. I now live in California, and I'm a Californian from birth. I claim California, even though a lot of people want to run from California. I love my state, and I'm in Washington a lot to do a little political commentary here and there, and to stay involved in politics. But because I have that perspective of being outside of the Beltway, and because I really am so focused and certain of the fact that God is in charge of our destiny as a nation, as an individual, I put less hope in the government than I once did, which doesn't diminish my desire to engage. I still feel like that's why I wrote this book. I mean, I'm encouraging Christians to engage, not because it's futile, but because it's important, because God uses people to bring his plan for our country and for our lives into fruition. We can't just sit back and expect God to do all the heavy lifting of going to the ballot box
Yeah.
and filling out our ballot for us. But ultimately, it's not a feeling of anxiety that compels me to be involved in politics. And this is something I think we have to be careful of as believers, to remember that God is God and the government rests upon Jesus' shoulders.
I think what your book really echoes is your faith, the fact that you're willing to let people know it, and the incredible backstory of you being the daughter of a Chinese mother and a Canadian father, and how they both witnessed what took place under a communist rule in China, and they escaped that coming here to America. And you are the daughter of immigrants, but you are more importantly a lover of God, and you've written a book about politics, but you're actually talking about the political aspects of the kingdom, and that's
Right.
the underlying thing, the kingdom of God.
Absolutely.
So it's really about trusting in God and not in man, because man will inevitably always let you down. I just look at myself in the mirror every day and say, another day, Lord, thank you for your amazing grace.
Indeed. I'm so grateful that's my middle name. I can just call on it every day. But you're right, Kelly. And if I could impress anything on the viewers, it would be, let's adhere to kingdom principles over
Yeah,
partisan politics. I
there
am
you
as
go.
partisan as they come. I am a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. I'm a diehard conservative, and I strongly believe that those principles best align with my faith. But there are so many friends that I have that feel just as passionately about Jesus that are on the other side of the aisle. And I recognize with full humility that I have a perspective on God's truth, but I don't have the full perspective. So, as believers, let's live out the things that God has said to us. Let's not just justify ends, like the means by our ends, of just saying we're going to just speak the truth and do it unlovingly and leave people feeling like engaging with us brought them down instead of giving them hope. That's really my hope, is that this book will help us think about how we engage in politics as much as we think about what we're engaging about.
Yeah, it's a breath of fresh air to hear you talk, because divisiveness in politics has really destroyed many hearts and minds of the American people, to the point that they've become so cynical that they've given up on hope. So my final question to you, Denise, is what's your hope for America?
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful that you even asked that. Literally every time before I even opened my mouth on TV, before we jumped on camera together, I said, Lord, every single time I say, God, fill my mouth with words that bring hope and light and your truth into this situation. And it would be my hope for America that Christians become ground zero for unifying our nation and the body of Christ in spite of the divisions that we have in our political views. If we can get that right in the body of Christ, the only people who are called to a standard of loving our enemies, that's it. That's Jesus's main message, is love your enemies, because it's easy to love everyone else. If we can live up to those values and ask the Lord to help us love those people that we disagree with, whether we consider them enemies or just, Democrats, Republicans rolling our eyes, I think that what we'll see is that we'll see a transformation of how our country survives this next very tumultuous, I'm sure, generation ahead of us, because our greatest threat is not external. It's not from Hamas. It's not from China. It's not from anything outside of the boundaries of our country. It is from who we are as Americans and how we treat and love one another well. So unity is the message, and it's a non-negotiable in Scripture. And that's my hope, is that Christians will be the starting point of reunifying our nation.
Well said, my friend. Thank you, Denise. Pleasure to have you on
Thank you so
America's
much.
Hope. Don't be a stranger. Come on back. All
Oh,
right?
thank you. I'd love to anytime. God bless you.
All right. Hey, everybody, get the book, okay? You'll enjoy it. There's a lot of chock full of scripture and good advice. Denise Grace Gitsham, thank you so much for being on America's Hope. God bless.
Thank you, Kelly. Have a great one.
You too. Denise Grace Gitsham, make sure you get her book. Well, coming up next, a story about division that will alarm and surprise many of you here in America. You see, there's something going on in the Ukraine that has not come out into the media. It's a division within the country, and it's an attack on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We're going to talk about that That's next on America's Hope. And welcome back to America's Hope. So joining me now is Bob Amsterdam. He is both a broadcaster, foreign policy expert, and celebrated international attorney who represents world leaders, opposition figures, and major institutions throughout the world. Most notably, he represents the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is now under siege, get this, by the Ukrainian government. Churches padlocked and even burned, priests jailed and tortured, parishioners interrogated, and now the parliament plans to outlaw the 1,000-year-old church entirely. And this will happen in the next 2 weeks, according to Bob, unless they continue to try and make people aware of what's going on. Bob, thank you for joining us this hour on America's Hope.
Thank you for having me.
So what is this story that you're making us aware of in terms of the church, most notably the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, being under what would appear to be persecution by its own government, which of course Volodymyr Zelensky is the president of?
Yeah, it's a pretty shocking story. Very hard for people to understand. 5 years ago, the Ukrainian government, under then President Poroshenko, established a national church called the OCU, which was done to basically break what the government viewed as some form of control of the 1,000-year-old Ukrainian Orthodox Church by the Russian Orthodox Church. This really was just a play for Ukrainian patriotism, because in fact the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was not taking orders from Russia at all by that point. They were already self-governing. But Poroshenko used this nationalism as, if you will, clickbait to get votes. And unfortunately, once President Zelensky took over, things were fine for a year or two, but then as the all-out invasion took place, the government appears to be using an attack on the church as a way of rallying around the flag. And churches of our client are being seized. Last week, an ancient monastery was taken. The priest who was in charge of the monastery was beaten. His jaw was broken. People men in balaclavas were seen storming the monastery. I mean, it's completely outrageous. And, I say this, they are my client. I call it our church, but I'm Jewish by persuasion. And I'll tell you that I'm outraged by this conduct. And I will say, no one in the West wants to cover this. Western journalists have become the useful idiots of the Ukrainian government and simply don't cover anything that doesn't fit the narrative about President Zelensky and the Ukrainians. So this has gotten very little attention.
So look, we're looking at all of this unfold in Ukraine. It's not being reported on. Is this perhaps one of the reasons why the Republicans on Capitol Hill, most notably on the House side, have stated that they are hard-pressed to fund Ukraine any more dollars from America in terms of defending itself against Russia?
Well, look, my clients are dying in those trenches. So I don't want to get into a game about funding because, I would be going against the lives of the parishioners in these churches. What I would say, and we're reaching out to the Speaker of the House as well, is that people who are men of the book, people who care about religion, be they Christian, Jewish, Muslim, should speak out against this outrageous conduct going on in Ukraine. And I certainly think the United States, having spent tens of billions of dollars supporting the Ukrainian government, has the right to demand that Ukraine abide by its own constitution and international law and international conventions, and stop harassing, raiding, and beating Christians who want to preach to their God and basically practice their religion.
Like this, Bob, as you've talked about, I mean, they're in the middle of a war that the aggressive forces of Russia are even bombing some churches, as we know, and houses of worship and even public buildings and where people live, schools. Nothing is off the table. But to find out about this cultural war, this religious war going on within the country of Ukraine amongst themselves, it's often been said a nation divided cannot stand. Is the nation divided on this, and does that limit their ability? As you've talked about, some of your clients are in the trenches trying to defend their country, Ukraine, and yet this is going on for the people who practice their faith.
Well, and I'll tell you, for crass political purposes, I mean, the allegation in Ukraine is they're worried about Russian interference. Well, I can tell you, quite frankly, I've been involved with this region all my life. Um, Very hard to take seriously these allegations of Russian interference. And if there were people in the church, God forbid, in any way assisting Russia, well, you have police, God knows many of them in Ukraine, who can develop evidence and charge people. You do not destroy a church. You do not deprive people of their communion with God. It is just absolutely unacceptable.
So let me ask you, what needs to be done in order to help the people
Listen,
who have been deprived of the ability to practice their faith in their own territory, in their homeland of Ukraine?
anybody who's listening, and I would ask them to speak to their pastors, their ministers, their rabbis, and ask them to please write or call the office of their congressman and raise this as an issue. One of the things I went to Washington a few weeks ago. I'm going next week. Try to see the Speaker of the House. We just need American politicians to stand up for freedom of religion. It is not a big ask.
At the same time, Bob, most people in America and the West would understand that there still is a war going on. There is an enemy that is larger than life, and that is Russia, slowly but surely penetrating most of the regions within Ukraine. And many people on the outside looking in, some of the critics, most notably of Ukraine, are stating there's no way Ukraine can win the war against Russia. Does that mean that NATO and the United States should just look the other way?
No, I mean, I am somebody who believes that the West has to stand with Ukraine in this battle. We're already in up to our necks. The only point I make about the church is exactly what you said earlier. This is not the time to polarize. In fact, the Speaker of the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, said that a few years ago. We would never attack the UOC because that would polarize the country. Well, I'm simply putting the speaker to his own test and saying, that's what you said. Now stick with it. I have 75-year-old leaders of this church being sentenced to 5 years in jail on absolutely pretextual,
What are they
baseless
charging them with?
charges.
What are those charges that they're coming up with that are so baseless, as you've claimed?
One charge was a metropolitan, one of the leaders of the church, allegedly had a pro-Russian pamphlet found in his computer. That was it. That was the crime for which he got 5 years. What they didn't say to anybody was that they planted that pamphlet on the poor man. But, when you're 75 and you're sentenced to 5 years, that's a death sentence. So, especially in a Ukrainian jail. So there really there's no mercy being shown. This is what you get on these attacks that have been taking place. And that's why we're trying to bring attention to it, as well as going to international institutions. Once they pass the law, we'll be going to the European Court. We'll be doing everything we can to attack the legality of the law.
Is there are you getting any support at all from the United Nations on this matter?
Yes, the United Nations has come out recently with a very strong statement urging Ukraine against this activity and this behavior.
Bob, I thank you for bringing this to light. I want to talk to you a little bit more about other matters that are going on in the world, most notably what's happening in Israel. You have some expertise in that as well. But again, when it comes to Ukraine, what's so shocking to anyone, including myself, is that at a time that the Ukrainian people need to be keeping the faith, there are members of their government trying to destroy the very faith that can help them endure and persevere through this terrible, brutal war that they're having with Russia. Bob, I'd like you to stay with us. On the other side of the break, we'll talk to you more about Israel. I'm talking to Bob Amsterdam. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm talking to Robert Amsterdam. He goes by the name of Bob, and of course, he's a broadcaster, a foreign policy expert, and a celebrated international attorney who represents world leaders, opposition figures, and major institutions. He's just enlightened us about what's going on with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And for those of you who are watching, you've probably been kind of, stupefied or dumbfounded with the fact that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is under siege by the very Ukrainian government that it is trying to work with and fight this war with. Bob, you've talked about people that you know from your clients of that church who are on the front lines fighting to protect Ukraine. Before I go into the next topic, which of course is Israel, does any of this war within a war, the culture war, the faith war, do you see it being remedied soon?
Well, there is one proposal to send the law that the Ukrainian parliament has been trying to adopt to an organization called the Venice Commission, which could basically report on its legality. And this would provide us all with time and maybe for cooler heads to prevail. So I'm hopeful that that may happen, and that would be a tremendous development if that occurs.
Yeah, as I've stated before, it's probably wise for any nation to keep the faith rather than burn the faith. And certainly at a time like this, we'll continue to watch the developments in Ukraine. I'm sure you'll keep us updated. Bob, look, you also have a podcast called Departures in which you discuss foreign policy. Most notably, you've been talking about Israel and Gaza. You've spent decades traveling to Israel, and you even served on the board of Haifa University for 25 years. Beautiful part of Israel. Haifa is just a wonderful place to visit. The situation going on there, how do you see this going on with Israel and Gaza? What has to be done in order for Israel to defend itself, and at the same time the humanitarian need that is most notably of concern to many people watching the developments unfold for the Palestinian people in Gaza?
Well, look, it is a tragedy in dozens of ways. Israel is being led by the worst leader it's probably ever had in Jewish history at this time. A man who, unfortunately, his political life is largely over, but he is left with this massive responsibility of trying to dig Israel out of a terribly dangerous situation. The myth of invulnerability has been lifted, and that is a terrible loss for Israel. Israel has a northern enemy with 150,000 missiles aimed at it. It has a massive, it has a massive enemy in Iran. The Houthis in Yemen are targeting Israel. At the same time, the issue that Israel faces is the tremendous damage inflicted on infrastructure in Gaza and on innocent civilians. And of course, the responsibility for that lies with Hamas. They embed themselves in civilian populations. They make the hospitals legally no longer places of protection. But there is still this careful mechanism of protecting civilian life that many say Israel, however justified in self-defense, may have violated. And we do have to say to ourselves that the animosities and hatred uh, are not going to go away. The I'm reading a book on the Arab Rebellion of 1936 that took place in Palestine, which really makes very clear that the genesis of this terrible animosity well precedes the establishment of the state itself. And for a two-state solution to work, it is going to require tremendous changes in the Israeli polity, tremendous changes in terms of the Palestinians, who have never had a leader worth their weight. I mean, corruption beyond rampant. The present leaders of Hamas worth upwards of $5 billion of stolen EU and other money. So the Palestinians are leaderless and rudderless, other than insane terrorists like Hamas. The Israelis are leaderless um, right now. The Israeli government is broken, completely broken. I don't think many people understand that the failure to protect their people is a reflection of the breakdown in Israeli governance overall. There are far too many cabinet posts. Netanyahu broke the system to try to keep himself in power. I've talked to many people inside Israel, uh, which is now basically being run by a lot of wealthy backers of NGOs who are putting the aid together for families and trying to cover the incredible expenses of Israel at war. But Israel is dysfunctional at this point. People around both borders have moved to the center. We've never seen Israel as vulnerable as it is today.
And at the same time, Bob, the vulnerability that we've seen in Israel, and the Israeli Defense Forces do their best to take out Hamas, and we've seen hostages being released and pauses in the fighting. At the same time, we do know that the threat that is against Israel is also, at the end of the day, against the United States as well.
Well, there's no question. There is no question. Whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, his assassination of Soleimani was unbelievably important. Soleimani was the one man who had really captured the soul of the Iranian Revolution. He was extraordinarily dangerous, and a lot of what we're seeing is his handiwork even today.
Yeah, and just let me remind
And
people who Soleimani was. He was a leader, of course, of the military and very regarded, highly regarded in Iran. The assassination took place at then President Trump's order there in Iraq, as he was planning to carry out some major attacks that the president got wind of and actually took him out. And Iran has vowed to take its revenge on America since then. I just wanted to bring people up to date on what you were talking about.
well, and again, in terms of President Trump, the Abraham Accords have withstood this attack, and of course, the reason for the timing of this attack was the rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia,
Yep.
and the need of the Iranians to break that momentum, and in that aided by Russia and China to some extent, who also did not want to see that rapprochement take place. So we're into major geopolitical games, and sadly, once again, both the Palestinians and the Israelis are to some extent victims of those games.
Yeah, and Bob, to your point, though, there's Russia, there's China, which also, of course, there's the aspect of North Korea being involved, Syria being involved. There are a lot of enemies against Israel, and there are a lot of adversaries against the United States. So this is a very delicate situation that the world is being exposed to right now. And to your point, I'm not sure that many people are aware of this, just as they aren't aware of what was going on with or what is going on with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine.
Well, I think that's true. I think as well that we have to say President Biden's and Lloyd Austin's use of American military power has been very well done.
Yes,
Uh, they
many people would
have
agree with you on that.
they have put the signal to the Iranians, the Russians. Uh, Lloyd Austin may be the finest Secretary of Defense we've had in a very long time, um, and President Biden. As a Jew, I live in London, but it is something I take very seriously that the president has not played politics. He has been very decisive in his stand and the administration's been decisive in terms of anti-Semitism, which to me is one of the biggest stories globally. I live in London. We have 150,000 people parading every Saturday, antagonizing and making Jews in this country extremely fearful to go to synagogue. We've seen a rebirth of anti Semitism, the likes I would never have believed possible.
Bob, it's really a dire situation out there as we see all of these difficult wars taking place and the different factions within countries. You talked about the faction that's going on within Israel, of course, and they'll try to work that out after the war. And then the faction that's going on in Ukraine between the government and the church. I've got to ask you, in the midst of all this show is called America's Hope. Is hope expunged because of all of these developments?
No, firstly, I would say to you, I've been practicing law in some of the most screwed up situations on earth, and I would never give up hope. Um, I think that we have to wonder that in the Mideast, perhaps the situation is so dire. Maybe some leaders will come out of this that can change the perspective. It certainly can barely get any worse. And in terms of geopolitics, I see the possibility of a paradigm shift coming in that unless we are going to go back to a Cold War forever stance, we have got to have a new analysis of some form of dialogue with both China and Russia. We simply can't allow ourselves into this deep freeze. And China is there's an incredible opportunity for good. I've studied China all my life, and um, I think Xi Jinping is unfortunately something of a throwback to Mao, but still, there is tremendous amounts we can learn from the Chinese uh, in terms of culture, technology. We cannot close doors to between China and Russia. Uh, maybe a quarter of the world's population, and certainly a very hefty part of the economic throw weight of the world. We have to find ways to talk. We have to find ways to allow a dialogue to take place. And I'm hopeful that can happen.
Robert Amsterdam, I appreciate you, Bob Amsterdam, joining us today. Make sure you're not a stranger, but come back, keep us updated on what's happening in Ukraine, and certainly come back and share your insights and analysis of Israel as well. Appreciate you being on the program today.
Thanks so much.
Again, I'd like to thank our guests, Denise Grace Gitsham, as well as Bob Amsterdam. My final word for tonight is based on what we've seen tonight, we know that persecution exists just about on every corner of the planet. No matter where you go, someone is persecuted because of what they practice or believe. That has to stop. It's been one of the causes of war throughout the world for centuries. It has to stop. Enough is enough. And as we've seen and heard from our guest tonight, we can either participate in a politics that keeps us forever divided, or we can have a hope to become united. Not only in our politics, but united in our respect and decency for law and order. Oh, and by the way, for respecting each other's faith. No matter what walk of life you come from, you are still a child of God, and you deserve to be respected. America, keep the hope alive. Don't let anything destroy that or extinguish the hope that endures. Until next time, America, good night. God bless. Your America and my America.
United we stand, divided